A warm welcome to everybody listening. My name is Suzanne Tempel, and I'm here with Anthony Harris. And Anthony Harris is the grandson of the famous Alec Harris, physical medium. Anthony and I met in 2017 in Cober Hill at the seminar of Stewart Alexander, and we were both invited to give talks and classes. And that's how we met. Anthony has been a practitioner of meditation and mindfulness for over 30 years. He's a qualified psychotherapist and an experienced teacher of mindfulness and meditation. And next to this, Anthony is the director of the Samye Foundation in Wales. And he has been with the foundation, or the charity, it actually is, isn't it, since 2006. So welcome, Anthony, and thank you for taking the time to have this talk with me.
Thanks, Suzanne. It's lovely to be here.
Well, it's lovely to have you. So let me start by all of you listening to give a little bit of background about the talk we're going to have. The scientific method that I'm working with is called the Awaken Mind Training, and it's developed by Professor Kate, and he was a physicist and a Zen master. And he found a way to train the mind to go to altered state of consciousness. But more than that, he found a way to develop from a normal waking state, a state of an awakened mind. And I have found that there is a lot of similarities between the way that Buddhists train the mind and the Awakened Mind method, which is actually not surprising when you realize that Professor Kate was a Zen master. Zen is a Buddhist practice, and it stems from the school of Mahayana Buddhism. So, Anthony, you were a Buddhist. Let me start by asking you how you were introduced to Tibetan Buddhism.
I guess I would say it was my good karma ripened, and my life moved me in that direction. So just the right people came along, and I was just moved in that direction. And it was when I met the lamas that I realized that I'd found something very important, that I'd sort of come home. I think with my grandfather, when he passed away, I realized that I'd had the very best of what spiritualism has, through my grandfather. And I realized that I had to find, it was strange, I just knew I had to find my own way. Not that this in any way was a diminishment of what I'd experienced, but I just had this overwhelming feeling that, I had something to do, and that something was going to happen, and it did. And so in the early years, when I first was encountering Buddhism, it did, I was only in my early 20s. It did cause quite a lot of conflict in the beginning. I was thinking I was being disloyal. It's so amazing how neurotic our minds can be. I was being disloyal to spirit because now I was going on to Buddhism, but of course that wasn't the case. That this is part of my journey, and that Buddhism offered me a profound structure that I could follow, because the way the Buddha's teachings are constructed, the depth and the subtlety of thought is unparalleled, and it just gave me the most wonderful structure I could really work with. So yes, I've come home with that.
Yes. So you actually never tried to explore that path yourself, because deep down you already knew that wasn't for you. Is that the case?
Which path? Spiritualism?
Yes.
It's a funny one, really, because there was nothing I needed to explore, because it's always been very much part of me. My link with spirit is always, it's still there. It's no different. And I realize now, when I started off on the Buddhist path, I think this is true for anybody on the spiritual journey. what we encounter in the beginning is our own projection about what we think it is. And it's a double-edged sword, because in one way it can be a source of inspiration, you know, all these wonderful ideas, you know, it's like almost like a new romance, you know, oh, it's wonderful, you know. But, you know, we have to, you know, if the journey is an authentic one, we have to go beyond our projections.
Yes.
Because our projections are a kind of creation of our own neurotic mind, and we all have neurosis as human beings. And I think, you know, this is a big stumbling block, as well as a great teacher for anybody on the spiritual journey. So what I understood Buddhism to be then to what I understand it to be now is totally different. And it's left me now with a sense of no attachment at all to this label Buddhism. So, as one great Lama said, Buddhism isn't what you think it is. It's ultimately your relationship to the moment. It's ultimately waking up to life as it is, not our weird version of it. It's a bit like, you know, if you're, you know, we've got, you know, we say Atlantic Ocean, Indian Ocean, you know, Mediterranean. So we've got all these kind of labels we add to the ocean. But if you're a fish in the sea, that question doesn't arise.
No.
Am the Atlantic, or is this the Pacific, or is it the Atlantic? You know, it's ocean is ocean.
Yeah.
So I reached a point where I just realized, with a huge relief, that I was never off the path. How could I ever be? The only thing that takes us off the path is when we lose awareness.
Yes.
You know, and it's realizing that we're always on it, we always have been, and how to come to that realization. So the thing about the spiritual journey, certainly from, you know, the way Buddhism would understand it, that the transformation of consciousness isn't, they don't see it as a sort of an evolution into a higher state. They talk in terms of primordial purity, or an original state, something that is always there, always has been, always will be. So they say there's two levels of truth. There's relative truth, and then there's absolute truth. And the relative is everything that we perceive, you know, that's spatially differentiated, that we talk, you know, that is conditioned by space and time, that we know because it has an opposite, you know, good, bad, up, down, night, day, life, death. These are all relative states. So our immediate experience is very much to do with that. And that's all we have to work with in the beginning. But through our practice of, you know, and meditation is the actual essential thing that we work with all of this, we begin to touch upon dimensions of being which are not to do with relative. Neither are they separate from relative. They're very much the very essence of everything that exists. So what meditation is a kind of reversal into enlightenment.
Sorry, a kind of reversal?
Reversing into it. It's not, you're not going towards it. So it's a case of, you know, there's a story of, in India, of a poor man. He wakes up in his little hut, you know, because he's very poor. He lives in a little mud hut, and he wakes up one night to go outside to go to the bathroom. And to his horror, in the moonlight that's coming through the window, he sees this huge snake curled up in the corner of the hut. And he's thinking to himself, oh my goodness, what am I going to do? And he's too scared to move in the beginning. So he eventually plucks up the courage to, he said, the light switch is over there, and there's the spade. I can rush over to the light switch and pick up the spade and kill the snake before it gets my family, because they're all sleeping on the floor on straw mats, you see. So he thinks a lot about this, and he's kind of worked out the strategy perfectly well. Yes, and he eventually gets up the courage and he runs over, puts the light switch off, picks up the snake, and is about to smash the snake over the head. And in the light, he sees it's a coil of rope. That's us.
Absolutely.
You know? So from a relative position where he was, that was a snake. You know, and what we can do, we can write a whole thesis on the best way to kill a snake if it comes into your house. You know? We can have endless conversations about it. But until the light switches on, we don't see its real nature. So in a similar way, our perception of everything is like that.
Absolutely.
And it's because that's the relative. The ultimate is that we already have that enlightened nature within us. In Buddhism, it's called Buddha nature. It's already there. It has everything within it. It's already enlightened. You know, it's beyond relative, beyond time, beyond space, beyond any form of definition that we can think of. It is what it is. So the spiritual journey is more a case of I need to pay attention to what is it that obscures my perception of my real nature. So in that way, it's a kind of letting go of misunderstanding.
Yes.
So in one level, we need to do a certain amount in the fact that we need to learn methods and how to work with this distracted mind. We need to use methods on how to work with the mind so that we're less distracted. You know, so it feels quite kind of clunky in the beginning, you know, being mindful, for example. So there's a certain amount of, in a sense, development of that. But ultimately, there comes a point when there is no sense of doing anything at all. There's just the process of being. So they have a wonderful saying in Tibet that consciousness is self-displaying and self-liberating. And it's when we let go of the need to do, so there's nothing to do. And so in the spiritual journey, we have to work with and understand that there are different areas of mind, and that our worldly mind, our everyday mind, has to have doing. Otherwise, you never get the shopping done. You know, we need to do some things, and you know, some levels. But that mind in itself, apart from the sort of pragmatic physical things that we have to do, has its own set of rules. Mind is autonomous and self-governing. So meditation, as the Buddha understood it, I think he was the greatest psychologist that ever lived. He understood, you know, how mind works and how to be skillful in how we relate to this mind in order to bring about its liberation. So meditation is all about that. The spiritual journey is about that, and it's a comprehensive process. That it's not just about meditation. Isn't something that I do on the odd occasion when I feel stressed, you know, or you know, as sort of isolated things. Understanding comes when we realize that everything we have is our teacher. Everything we have is our process, and it's changing our relationship to everything, so that our life becomes our practice. My own teacher, Akong Rinpoche, said the only difference between your everyday life and your spiritual practice is your attitude. And he really lived that. So there's a wonderful story, a true story about Ajahn Chah. He was a great master in the Theravadan Buddhist tradition. And it says that he was invited to attend the teaching of another senior monk in another part of the country. And one of his students said, Bhante, which is a title of respect that you give to a senior monk of that tradition. he said, are you looking forward to hearing what Bhante so-and-so is going to teach about? And Ajahn Chah gave the most extraordinary answer. He said, no, he said, I'm more interested, he said, to see how he puts on his shoes. You see, it's that. You know, it's that moment-to-moment relationship we have to everything. And so meditation is that relationship. The spiritual path is that relationship that I have to, number one, what is my relationship to my own mind? And what is my relationship as a consequence to others and to everything else? So I think the essential point is that we have to understand that if we look at our track record as human beings, you know, we've come a long way in the sense, and certainly in a material sense, where we have all this amazing technology, we've got big cities, we've got fast cars, all the, you know, the gadgets, you know, we've got Zoom, we can talk, you know, we've got all this. But there's still violence, there's still war, there's still tremendous suffering. So there's something we haven't understood.
Yeah.
There's something we haven't understood. It's for the simple reason we don't know where to look. And so habitually a kind of way in which we relate to life is in a kind of dualistic way, where we have me and world, me and that, me and this. So there's a kind of going out to, that is what I'm investigating, that's what I'm looking at. So there's that, and that's fine, but we forget that there's something that sees that. What is it that perceives that? And that is, you know, makes all the difference, because if we don't know, and what we don't realize, that mind, what is this mind that I'm talking about? That mind is determined on what we understand.
Absolutely, yes.
And so I guess what I'm trying to say is that the initial part of the spiritual journey has to be about, and is definitely about, our own psychology.
Absolutely.
Because whether we like it, sorry, carry on, Suzanne, what are you going to say?
Well, I just wanted to say that for some people, the concept of me and the world, or me and you, is to break that is to begin with a really difficult thing. But I have found that you perceive the world as you think. The way you think, that's the way you perceive the world. So for me, that was a really good starting point to realize that, like the man with, you know, the snake, to realize that actually what was there was only there because my mind was made up that way. For me, that was a really good starting point for investigating the mind and realizing more and more that whatever I perceived, I did not perceive in a very objective way. For instance, my sister lives in a loft, and for 2 years, me and my husband, we wondered why she would have the kitchen made as it was made, because when we were there, when she's away, we take care of our parents, and so when she was away, we my husband and me would move into their loft, and when we opened the refrigerator, it couldn't move, the door couldn't move further open than like that. So we would, you know, crawl in, and we always wondered, why did she have the kitchen made like that? And it was only after 2 years I realized that it wasn't made like that at all. The other part of the kitchen could move. So we could move it out of the way. It was on wheels. I never realized that, but you couldn't see it anyway, but I never realized that. And that was, for me, such a profound finding that I thought, okay, I have all these concepts, I have all these ideas about my sister and the way she lives, and that the idea that she would design a kitchen like that, and which was typical for my sister, I thought. And then I realized it wasn't like that at all.
Yes.
That reality didn't exist. It only existed because I thought that was what happening.
That's when the snake became a rope for you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But it's only when we realize things like that we start to investigate. Okay,
Yes.
what kind of concepts do I have? What kind of prejudice do I have? What convictions do I have within me that make me perceive the world as I perceive it?
Yes. My teacher, one of my teachers, who was one of the pioneers of the secular mindfulness in the West, a most wonderful person called Rob Nairn, he put it so beautifully. He said, as human beings, when we come to learn about meditation, he said, we have to accept the fact that we are a mess.
So true.
But what we have to become is a compassionate mess. And so the predicament of being human is that the mess cannot sort out the mess. The neurotic mind cannot sort out the neurotic mind. And in the beginning, that's all we know. And that's all we think, I must be this is me, oh my gosh, But fortunately, that isn't the truth, that we realize that mind is multidimensional. Mind is ultimately even beyond that. And that because it is multidimensional, there's parts of the mind, the deepest part of the mind, which is already, as I said, that Buddha nature, already free. And therefore, if we can learn how to discover that more and more, it totally changes our relationship to everything else.
Absolutely.
Because what we thought was so real and so solid becomes something transparent. It's a bit like they use the image in Buddhism about the clouds, that the sky is like the mind and clouds are thoughts and feelings. And we think we are the clouds. That's it. But we don't realize that the true nature is sky.
Absolutely.
And that sky is there and that the clouds come and go.
Somebody or something is aware of the sky, of the feelings and the thoughts.
Yes. And so for example, in Western psychology, when we say mind, we talk about thoughts and feelings, perceptions, we say that's mind. But in Buddhism, they say, no, that's not mind. Those are mind objects. Those are perceptions, but not mind itself. So it's very different. And I think understanding this, because we don't understand that habitually, the way we've all been conditioned as human beings, this kind of everyday mind, this mess that we talk about, becomes the norm. We all collude at the same level and it becomes normal. But it's only when we realize, when suffering comes along, well, there's something not quite right here, because that's one fact, that this mind is subject to suffering. So the Buddha was often called the great physician, because he said that the greatest disease of all was ignorance.
Yeah.
The greatest disease was not understanding our true nature. So he said that there is a profound misunderstanding called avidya, or fundamental ignorance, as to the nature of who and what we are.
Yeah.
And because of that there's suffering.
Yes.
So this dynamic of meditation is what makes that all come about through our own direct experience. And it's understanding that from moment to moment to moment, whether we like it or not, our habitual mind is at work. And it's continuously distorting our perception of every moment. And it's difficult to work with because it's not, in psychology would say, it's not a conscious process, it's an unconscious process. But nevertheless, it affects consciousness. So meditation is therefore a means by which we learn how to bring our attention in a skillful way to the moment, to the mind, where we begin to notice, well, what happens that moment there's me and that moment a thought arises, or whether I see a beautiful object, wherever it is, whatever that moment of experience is, what is happening in the interface of that? And there's a lot happening which we're not consciously aware of. And in that interface arises all the reasons why we become stuck, why we are not able to move beyond our habitual mind, where we remain as the mess trying to sort out the mess.
It's much like Einstein says.
What did he say?
He said that you can never solve a problem with the same components, really. You have to, step out of that in order to solve a problem.
Yes.
Same thing.
Yes. So, yeah, so it's this. So I think, the mess trying to sort out the mess is the truth. We have to accept that we're a mess. But the problem is, again, we have this egoic mind which doesn't like mess. And so you could say the ego is a construct of all our conditioning. And ego has within it a kind of gravitational pull. It pulls every experience, every moment towards itself. And in so doing that, ego wants everything to conform to its reality. It's like ego is that hidden voice of authority that says, the world is flat, don't go too far out of my reach, you're going to fall off the edge.
Absolutely.
And it's so convincing.
Yeah.
And so in this whole journey meditation, it's how we begin to work with that.
Mm-hmm.
And the magic ingredient, of course, is compassion and loving kindness. Because one of the things about ego is it's highly reactive and it isn't compassionate. It's full of fear. It's full of jealousy. It's full of partisanship. It's full of grasping, greed. It contains all the negative sort of mind states. So it is very unstable. So the path of meditation is how we begin to work with all of this, step by step, and realizing that it is how we meet the moment in a way which doesn't feed more energy into the egoic process, which means, how do I stop the reactivity? And that means kindness and compassion. So compassion does the very thing ego doesn't want. It says to negativity, hello, you're welcome. You can be here as long as you want.
Yes.
Don't go away. You're fine. There's nothing wrong. You can be here. And that's the image of, manure for the mind. Manure might be smelly, horrible stuff. But if you were to say to a gardener, oh, this is awful, get rid of it, the gardener says, on the contrary, give me more, and wonderful stuff grows out of it. So this is, where the meditator, the practitioner realizes that everything I have, all my neuroses, all my problems, if I am skillful, become my teachers. In Tibet, they have this saying that our negativities are wisdoms in disguise.
Absolutely. Because
so
for
like that.
what I have also found, and it's funny that you should say that some people don't seem to suffer enough to look for a way out or liberation.
Yes. Yes.
So in that way, suffering or our ego, especially when it's really hurting us, can be our friend, because if we suffer enough, then we might start to look for ways out.
Yes.
And some people are just so comfortable and are not unhappy enough, so to speak, to start looking for ways out.
Yes. It can be a wake-up call.
Yes.
It's funny, in Tibetan iconography, they have, they call it the Wheel of Life. And it's a symbolic representation. It can be seen as, as psychological states. It could also be seen as states of existence. And they talk about different realms, and they talk about there's the human realm that we are in.
Mm-hmm.
They talk about another realm called the God realm. And in the God realms, the beings there have lifespans that last hundreds and thousands of years, and everything is like paradise and everything is wonderful, and they have bodies that are very radiant, they're very beautiful, and they don't learn anything.
Mm.
And eventually they say when the karma of that existence runs out and their colors begin to fade and the light diminishes, and they realize, and the other gods shun them because they're dying from that existence. They realize they're wasted. So psychologically we can see that, in the very rich, where everything is fine. There's no incentive, and they stay stuck in a prison, a gilded cage of their own wealth, and there's no looking.
Yeah, which make the story of the Buddha, the Siddhartha prince,
Absolutely.
all the more wonderful, because he had that golden cage, didn't he?
Yes. Similarly, also in meditation itself, there are mind states that can arise in meditation which are very blissful. And my teachers have always said, not to get stuck in those, but to treat them like any other experience. There are some monks in some traditions which they call them rosy apples, where they will meditate and they'll get blissed out, and they'll be blissed all day long. And they go to bed, wake up the next day, stunned, and they're happy and they're smiling, little rosy cheeks, and everything's wonderful. But there's no learning
progression, no progression.
It's just getting stuck in a blissful state, which is a bit like taking a drug, really.
It is. It's absolutely like taking a drug, because those gamma waves, when you're in such a bliss state, affect the brain to such a level that we have all these endorphins and wonderful hormones in our system, and we feel wonderful. So you're actually drugging yourself each and every time.
Yes. So they always say, just treat anything as just another experience passing through the mind.
Mm. Can I ask you, Anthony? You spoke about realms. Now, I know that within Buddhism, mediumship is recognized as one of the truths. Let me say, that might not be the right word, but mediumship is recognized as such. But in Buddhism, they have a completely different view on mediumship, have they not? Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Well, this is very interesting, and I think, as I was saying to Nicole earlier, I really have a strong feeling that there needs to be dialogue. There's so much to learn, and it seems to be, yes, in Tibetan Buddhism they have what they're called oracles.
Yes.
And they are mediums, but the beings that talk through them are not human. They're a spiritual being of a different order.
Absolutely.
And so there is mediumship, yes. And so and in spiritualism, as we understand it in the West, those life forms are never spoken of. So there seem to be some sort of spectrums of experience in across the board, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong in that, but I think that for me, everything exists in relationship to everything else. The Buddha called it interdependent origination, praticca samuppada, and I think in the world of today, it's made even more, accessible because of, social media. We're even more aware. And now we've had the painful lesson of the COVID crisis, where we are realizing the interdependent nature of the universe, because everything affects everything else. But the strength of that is that we can understand things profoundly in relationship to other things, when there is some sort of dialogue and communication happening. Now, His Holiness the Dalai Lama has done that already in the most wonderful way. I don't know whether it's still happening, but certainly for many years he'd have all the top thinkers in the world, quantum physicists, neuroscientists, you name it, they'd all meet in Dharamsala, and they'd had this amazing dialogue with all the Buddhist scholars.
A lot of it is on YouTube also.
Yes, and what arose out of that was something so wonderful, and everybody learned, everybody benefited, and I think this is very important.
Absolutely.
And I think certainly for spiritualism, this is something I think that needs to happen.
Absolutely.
And is going to happen without a doubt. But so I'm very interested in that. For example, that's just one example. And another example, if you look at the shamans of Africa, that's another form of mediumship.
Absolutely.
And also very interesting. And there's a wonderful true story relating to that. Shall I tell it to you?
Yes, please.
Yes. Yeah. My first Buddhist teacher, Akong Rinpoche, who founded Samye Monastery, he was a very extraordinary person, a very, very compassionate person, and he had many, many hundreds of humanitarian aid projects throughout the world. He was also a doctor of Tibetan medicine. And when he went to Africa, he wanted to meet the shamans, they're called Sangoma, the spirit, the spirit mediums of the African people, because Tibet had its own pre-Buddhist religion called Perm, which was very shamanistic as well. So it's something definitely not unknown as is Tibetan Buddhism. So he wanted to meet the Sangomas. So Rob, this wonderful teacher I mentioned earlier, who was in charge of all Rinpoche centers in South Africa and in Zimbabwe, he arranged a meeting with the top Sangoma, the most senior one in Southern Africa, who was like the Merlin, he was like the Merlin to the African people, and his name was Vusu Mazulu Credo Mutwe. His name was.
Oh wow! I love that name.
And he was the most wonderful man, and very wise, and a great mystic. And at the time in South Africa, there was a lot of political problems, and Credo Mutwe was very old, so he went into hiding. He was hiding for his own safety, and so Rob eventually managed to get a meeting arranged for him to meet Credo Mutwe. Now, what happens in the Sangoma tradition when two Sangomas meet? Traditionally, they are never told who they are going to meet, so there's no preconceived ideas. And when they do meet, they kind of read each other psychically, and whoever is the greatest one, the other one gives obeisance to the greater one. So in this way, Credo Mutwe was not told who he was going to meet. So Rob and Rinpoche were sitting in this mud hut, which traditional African hut is a very low door. There's no window, so it's very gloomy on the inside. It has a sort of like a thatch roof. So when you come into it from the bright sunlight, you can't see who's in the room straight away because your eyes are still, adjusting to the gloom.
Used to the light, yes.
Yeah. Plus the fact that Creator Mutwe was very old and he had very thick glasses. He had very poor eyesight. He couldn't have possibly seen who it was. Anyway, so Rob said to me that the doorway darkened momentarily as Creator Mutwe sort of bent down and came into the room. And as he straightened up, Rob said it was as if he was struck by lightning. He let out this shout of, "Oh my God, it's you." And he literally fell on the ground, flat on his face, at Rinpoche's feet. And he put Rinpoche's feet on his head and he kept on saying, "Oh my God, it's you. Oh my God, it's you, it's you, it's you." And what transpired then was the most extraordinary conversation. And Credo Mutwe realized that Rinpoche was fulfillment of a prophecy in his people that had been made by a great Sangoma some 250 to 300 years before.
Wow.
And they told of this great spiritual teacher who had come to Africa and be a great friend and help to the African people. And he realized this was Rinpoche.
Wow.
And not only that, but he, from that Sangoma, that great Sangoma, those hundreds of years before, there was a sacred object that the Sangoma had. And he wanted it to be given in the future to this great teacher when he came. And it was handed down over the centuries by the Sangomas, and Credo Mutwe was the keeper of it. And so he was able to give it to Rinpoche.
Wow.
Now, what was so interesting was that the Karmapa, who's the head of Rinpoche's lineage, the same lineage that I belong to, the Kagyu lineage, the Karmapa's nickname for Rinpoche was African. He used to call him the African Lama. And he actually looked African, funnily enough. So he had a very strong connection to Africa, Rinpoche. And so this was, and it proved true that Rinpoche he did an enormous amount of work and still continues. His project still, there's a lot of meditation centers there in Africa. So there was a tremendous, something very wonderful happened.
Amazing.
And Rob never saw what it was that Credo Mutwe gave Rinpoche. He kept it secret, but that was something very wonderful. So it shows you there is so much behind the scenes that we don't realize. We just look at the surface, but we don't realize the real connections.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's a wonderful story.
There's a wonderful book written by Mutwe called Indaba, My Children, and it's about that thing. It's an anthology of the African what's the word? Mythology and spiritual traditions. It's been wonderful reading, yes.
There are much indigenous people in America as well, but also in Indonesia, who work with shamanism and there are mystics among them, and with mediumship, and those people haven't lost that ability and are using it in a very natural way. And sometimes it almost makes me wish that I was born way back in time, way earlier, to have experienced this. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I think, when I think back at the Buddha's time, the world of the Buddha is so different today. In some way, much simpler.
Yeah.
Today, we've got many more objects of distraction. We live in an increasingly busy world.
Absolutely.
But in that way, we could say there's more opportunity to practice because there's more, it's more temptation.
Yes, that's one way of looking at it. And I love the way of looking at it. But it also means that the more distracted people are, the more they are addicted to television and their smartphones and stuff like that, and relatively happy because especially in in countries where there's no poverty and people are relatively happy. They have a roof over their head, they have food, the basic needs are there, and they're now looking for distractions of their mind instead of liberation and enlightenment.
Yeah, and this is, it's almost, our egoic mind is almost, it's almost an inevitability when we start on the spiritual journey, particularly when it comes to meditation, that our habitual mind states can hijack the meditation and masquerade as the meditation, and we don't know it's happening, which is understandable because they are the mind states the most familiar to us.
Yeah.
So what meditation is doing, it's saying that the initial part of the journey is essentially about our own psychology. But eventually the meditation goes beyond psychology because it goes beyond the limits of the egoic mind.
Yeah.
But the ways it can trick us is, for example, that's why when people are learning about meditation, there has to be a lot of inquiry. So, for a student to know, whether they were just, for example, they might think that they are having a very spacious, big sort of meditation, but they're not. They're spaced out.
Yeah. I know.
They are dissociated. So
I
that
know.
is a neurotic process, a disconnect.
Yeah.
Or they may think they are being mindful and letting go of thoughts and feelings, but they're not. They're suppressing them.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, and I think it's, so when students start to know the difference, that's a very good sign, or when they first come to meditation, they think, oh my gosh, this meditation isn't working, I'm getting worse. They're not, they're just getting clearer.
Yeah.
And just seeing how busy the mind is.
Yeah.
These are,
there is so much misconceptions on what meditation is. And fortunately, I can see within my EEG system what's happening with people sometimes.
Yes.
So I have seen people and the suppressing of thoughts. I can see that within my system because the alpha signals in the brain go down. And people then always say to me, well, somebody told me that I wasn't supposed to think during meditation. All thoughts need to be gone. And I said, who said that? Who said that?
Misconception, yes.
There is so much. And, the example, this is why I had to laugh. Your example about being spaced out. I've seen that too.
Yes.
People who are actually generating gamma waves and like I've talked about gamma waves already. They're in this sort of no feeling of the body anymore, no thoughts, there's this nothingness, right? So there's no awareness either, only just there's really nothing, and it's so peaceful and so quiet, and then they think, oh, this is meditation. And then I tell them, no, it's not. And it's not doing anything for your progression either. And then they're so baffled because, the way we teach meditation in the West, and I'm not talking about all the meditation teachers, but a lot of them have no clue what they're doing.
But can you see why that happens? Because the egoic mind we are, as human beings, we are functionally dysfunctional. Was it dysfunctionally functional? I'm not sure which way around it is.
Both are true, I think.
We just don't cope. So we have defense mechanisms, which psychology knows. We have suppression, repression, dissociation, denial. You've got all these defenses. And so when we come to meditation, obviously, it's the egoic mind sees this as another opportunity to escape.
Yeah.
So the meditation can get hijacked by a defense mechanism.
Yeah.
And that's why we want to meditate. And people often say that because it's fueled from this sort of way of thinking, which is an unconscious process. I want to meditate because I want to ascend to a higher plane. In other words, I want to leave all the nasty stuff behind. I want to get away.
Don't want to deal with it. Yes.
Don't want to deal with it. Or, or as you said earlier, I want, I need to empty my mind, get rid of. It's not that.
No, they don't realize that the pathway to that state they're really looking for is through the mess, through the manure.
Yes.
And not around it.
Yes. That's why the image of the lotus is so popular in the East, because the lotus, it grows out of the mud, the muck, and then it goes through the water, and then when it opens in the sunlight, in other words, representing the flowering of consciousness, it is the most exquisitely beautiful flower imaginable. But it wouldn't have been that without the mud.
Absolutely.
So it needs that, and of course, this is the integration. Jung called it the integration of the shadow. We have to work with these things, and I think compassion is the key. Where we do. And the thing in meditation is, meditation isn't an activity, as Rob once said. Meditation is a state. It is the process of being. So there's nothing to do in meditation except learning how to be present. But it is how we are present. It is that compassionate presence. It is understanding that this is a journey without blame. There's no criticism or judgment. So when that happens in the mind, then the mind is not reacting to the moment. It's as soon as there's a reactivity, there's energy fed right back into the negative system, and we get stuck. It's the glue, as Lama Yeshe says. But as soon as there's compassion, there's an acceptance.
Exactly.
And then there's the process of meditation. So in reality, you could say, in the deeper sense, we don't meditate, we get meditated. It does us.
Yes.
It's the process of consciousness, that it just does itself. It's the letting go.
But I understand why that beginning is hard for people, because the mind has a tendency to move away from negative, what we call negative emotions, like fear and pain, anger and sadness and stuff like that. So and it has the tendency to look for the positive ones. So I can totally get why people have those first few years really with meditation, that is really difficult to go towards it instead of away from it.
You see, it's not the thoughts that are the problem, it's our relationship to them.
Yes.
So what happens, sort of the anatomy of what happens between when we're there and when the arising of a feeling, what comes up, we have the sense of, we can call it the observer. And then we have, what is it that's observed? It is that thought or that feeling. So let's say you are meditating and something comes up from the depths of the mind, let's say a nice feeling, let's say anger comes up. Now what happens is, even before we're consciously aware of it, the mind has seen it at that level, and immediately it reacts to it. And it reacts to it in two ways, whether it likes it or whether it doesn't. So that and this is all habitual process. So our habitual mind is ruled by a strong preference system, whether I like it or whether I don't. It's called attraction and aversion. So let's say it's a negative feeling like anger. So immediately anger arises, the mind sees it, and immediately it doesn't like it. So it reacts to it. In that moment of reaction, it sees it, it judges it. As soon as it judges it, it solidifies the experience. Then it becomes mine, and it is my problem. And it's me.
Yeah.
It's me. And in that process, it happens in a twinkling of an eye. That's the moment of getting stuck. And at that moment, we actually don't see the real nature of that moment. So there's a kind of, every moment of our experience, there's two processes. There's the original material, and then there's our reaction to it. And because we don't know that's there, we smudge the two areas together, and it's become my problem. And this is me.
Yeah.
So
immediately we're personal again.
Personal again. Yeah.
Yeah.
So with meditation, through the mind constantly throwing up thoughts and feelings, through being mindful, through continuously meeting that moment in a non-reactive and in a loving way, slowly we are not feeding energy back into those processes of solidification and identification. Then the whole experience of that thought changes from being very solid to opaque and then quite transparent. So that there comes a point in the meditator where the same stuff arises, but the meditator just doesn't believe it anymore.
Yeah.
It just has no reality.
Yeah.
So, and then at that level, it's called freedom from thought, when there's the first glimmerings of some sense of freedom in the mind, because they're not, they're just, they're not hoodwinked anymore by habitual practice.
Yeah.
They may still arise, and it'll be a long time before that ceases, but long before then, there's a real sense of
they're not
freedom.
They're not triggered and pulled into the mind's web again.
I have to say, Suzanne, I feel, being interviewed on YouTube, I had quite a lot of resistance to it for the simple reason I don't want people to have any idea or any thought that I'm a spiritual teacher. I have no illusions whatsoever, because I've been around the real teachers. The real teachers are coming from an enlightened source. They are the lamas, the meditation masters. So what I say is my limited, unenlightened perspective. The real teaching rather go to the real experts in the field. They're the real teachers, and they are accessible on the internet, on YouTube. So people must do that. Don't listen to me. I'm just know very little.
Nevertheless, I'm very grateful that you took the time to share your experience and your personal knowledge with us on Buddhism and things like that. Before we end the session, because we're already talking for an hour.
I feel very passionate about it, don't I? That's so box.
Well, that's nice. I mean, my interest. I have a huge interest in Buddhism as well, so I could talk for hours about it. So I don't mind. But before we go, I want to ask you, for the people who see this and listen to it. Do you have an advice for people who seek self-healing?
Who's seeking, sorry?
Self-healing.
Self-healing.
Yeah.
Well, meditation by itself is self-healing. Life is about healing. And the most profoundest healing of all is the healing of the mind. The mind is the one thing through which we experience everything. You cannot experience anything outside of your mind. And when that improves, everything else improves. So meditation is the number one. But do get instruction from a proper teacher. There are people out there who are not authorized to teach, who might be very well-meaning, but do not have the sufficient knowledge. Look around, certainly from the Buddhist side, with Buddhism, what's very important if you want to explore Buddhism is that one of the great things about Buddhism is that it had this idea, this system of what's called lineage. And lineage is literally an unbroken line of teaching from master to disciple, literally from your teacher, you can literally trace it right back through time, right back to the Buddha. And lineage has kept the teaching of the Buddha pure, undistorted. So check out, when you're looking for a teacher, make sure they're coming from an authentic lineage. Look at the students and see what's the nature of the students. Are they sort of all excitable and revved up on some emotional trip, or are they grounded, sensible, down-to-earth people, kind people? Also, when you're looking at the teacher, what do you hear from the teacher? Is it the display of psychic powers that he's drawing students to him? If it is, then be careful, because any sort of display of power can become abusive. Is he drawing his students to him because of compassion and loving kindness? Does he embody those qualities of humility and clarity and wisdom? In other words, does he embody what he's talking about? That is important. If he's coming from a proper lineage, you can rest assured the lineage would have made very sure that he's qualified to teach, and he wouldn't be probably teaching if he hasn't been authorized to do so. So this is very important. Yeah, and I'm talking about, this is true across the board, but of course my main knowledge of is through Tibetan Buddhism, and there are these authentic lineages, but the internet's great. There's a transparency
Absolutely.
about it. Check it out, and then go for it.
All right, so Anthony, again, a heartfelt thank you to you, and for everybody who wants to have a look at the website of the Samye Foundation, it's sfwales.org. Is that right, Anthony? It is, right?
Yes.
Yes. So hopefully, I'm looking forward to eventual next talks, Anthony, whether it's on Zoom or through email. So thank you again.
Yes. Thank you, Suzanne. Take care and stay well and safe.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
See you.